Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this fine evening for this week's Come Follow Me lesson with the Mormon News Report podcast. My name is Jenny Noonan Dye, and I am joining you from Provo, Utah, along with my husband, John Dye. He's the one responsible for all that you're seeing on your screen for those of you who are partaking of the video. As always, for those who are participating here with us in real time, we'd love to hear from you, where you're from, what stood out to you in your study this week, whether it's the first time or the 50th time you've read these verses, or even if you didn't read them at all. We get to as many comments as we can, just as we would if we were all gathered together in person. We like to try to use the space and time as a supplement to your other Come Follow Me studies to sometimes take a deeper dive into at least one aspect of a lesson that stands out. And we love having your participation and feedback. I'd like to excuse my co-host for the Mormon News Report podcast, Brent Malone in Detroit. Let's be honest, it is almost 9 o'clock there. He's probably doing bedtime with his cute family. And welcome our good friend in California, Ben Bernards. Hello.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome again to another Monday night edition of the Mormon News Report Hour of Power. It's family night, for those who remember what family home evening used to be. Kids,
it's family night.
Whether you're joining us audio or live on the stream or watching after the fact, we're so glad to have you here. We're the comfy chair out in the foyer, but we're glad to be here for the AP Church History version, supplementing your Come Follow Me. We're kind of like the big floppy beach hat to your SPF 50 to keep those cheeks nice and moisturized and blocked. Jen and John, looking into the summer. If you guys could go anywhere this summer, now that travel is maybe going to start happening, where would you go?
What? For real?
Yeah, like out of the house, like outside of the city, like going someplace else. Where would you want to go?
Do you mean Italy?
I mean, hey, that could work.
Yeah. I mean Italy. I mean New York City. I mean Ireland.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Winner, all around. That sounds great.
Ireland, China, Montana.
Ireland is awesome. China would be fabulous. But let me tell you about Billings. Billings. It's fabulous. The sky up there, so big.
Big sky. And right next to where John Dye grew up, Hamilton.
Whoa. Hey now.
Yeah.
Hey, the sky up there, it's big if true. That's pretty awesome. Listen,
I've not been to Montana a lot, but I've been in the summer and it's stunning. So what about you, Ben? Where would you go?
This summer, I just might go visit some family, scout out across the United States, and we actually just barely booked tickets to go to Europe for a senior trip for my son. And we're crossing our fingers because we found an easily refundable fare, and France is supposed to open their doors in like 2 days. And so we had to hurry and book stuff now before they open it up. So if possible, then Paris and Antwerp and Belgium and Amsterdam is coming our way. So we'll see.
That's excellent. I love that. Let's give a quick background here. So typically, and for well over a year, on a regular basis, we have done these Come Follow Me lessons on Sunday. We did not yesterday. We had an emergency in one of our homes, and so we didn't. And so it's very likely that we might have a completely different audience right now. So thank you for being here. It might also be the same audience. Either way, we're glad that you're here. And again, we'd love to hear where you're watching us from. So because of that, and because the way that we do this is that we do the current Come Follow Me lesson, and because we do that on Sunday, we are actually going to be covering what is now yesterday's lesson. So it is the Come Follow Me lesson for May 31st through June 6th. Today is June 7th, which covers Doctrine and Covenants sections 60 through 62. And even though we had that little stick in our spokes yesterday, we still we are so appreciative of all the work that Ben does and puts into this, and we're really looking forward to to hearing and seeing what you've got, Ben. So go right ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you so much. And again, welcome to people. We know that this is kind of a different time, but we're so glad that you're here. Facebook user in San Bruno, California. I'm just up the road in Sacramento. Glad you're here. I hope you guys are tied down in the wind. It's kind of breezy outside. And Wendy, welcome. We're so glad to see you as well. I want to start off with the stories of 3 different young married couples. Very similar parallel. Three different people, very similar parallel experiences. But one of these things was not like the other. So the first one is the story of my father. He was considering a job change. He'd been married 5 or 6 years. He already had 4 children living in California. And through an unusual series of dreams, he was quite literally pointed to move to another state. And through a series of heavenly coincidences, everything lined up just right. And he was literally directed to a home that he saw in his dreams that he had never seen before. And that eventually became my childhood home, where I grew up in Utah County. And he raised 9 kids there and had a very long tradition and, put down roots in that corner of town. And I grew up always hearing his story of being led there in a dream. And I thought, okay, cool. That's how it happens, because that's what happens in the scriptures. I mean, that's what happened to Lehi and so many other people. Second story, a man who would later become my father-in-law, grew up in a totally different state. Through a series of dreams and promptings, was also directed to come to Utah, where he found a surprisingly good, solid job, a good home. 4 of his 5 children met their future spouses there, including a cute little redhead that I met. They moved in while I was on my mission. And because he was led there by inspiration, I now have a family whom I absolutely love. So, of course, by the time it got to my turn to decide where my family was going to put down roots, I kind of had a precedence from both sides of the family of how this was supposed to work.
Sure.
So I naturally expected something similar. And so when I had an opportunity to put down roots with a new career that would require me to pack up my family, move several time zones away into a city that had no family members, I'd be completely on my own, totally disconnected from everybody. I fasted and I prayed and I got no response. No dreams, no visions, no direction. Didn't even get a confirmation as to whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. No thumbs up, no nothing. And that left me very confused. I mean, what does it mean when I prayed for direction and I didn't get anything? Was it a wrong choice? Was there possibly something better? Was there something that God knew about that he wasn't telling me? Was I heading towards disaster? And surely if I was, that God would have warned me, right? And maybe would I be miserable later? I was talking to some of my buddies at the place that I was potentially going to leave behind. And they were like, how do you know it's not going to be horrible out there? Have you gotten a confirmation from God? And I was kind of like, no, I think it's a good idea. And they were like, oh man, you shouldn't do this, man. And so I realized that this was kind of hard for me. Maybe the problem was my side. I wasn't good enough. Maybe I didn't have enough faith. Maybe I could do one more temple trip. Maybe I could fast again or fast a little bit longer. And looking back on it now, I realize it's almost as if I had entered a type of spiritual bartering with God. Like the blessing was in a vending machine. And if I put in just the right token of pious devotion, I could get that blessing that I wanted to. Was it reading my scriptures every day? Was it doing, paying an extra fast or whatever? What did I have to do to qualify for the blessing? Because I didn't want to stray from the path, but at the same time, he wasn't telling me which way to go. So for anybody that has had an experience like that, and surely I'm not the only one, this kind of reveals a very common refrain in our culture, which is that, yes, we believe in personal revelation. Yes, we believe in the gift of the Holy Ghost. Yes, we believe that we can be guided by the Spirit in some cases, but not all. And unfortunately, this kind of attitude where we expect constant direction all the time can bring a somewhat unhealthy relationship with divinity, where we have these unrealistic expectations of our half of the responsibility, if it's only a half. And it fails to develop the critical thinking skills, the decision analysis skills, but most importantly, our own self-confidence in using our agency and our reliance and appreciation for the atonement if and when things go wrong. This is what we would call a sandy block in our spiritual foundation. So hopefully when we talk about these sections today, I want to kind of help identify what a sandy block would kind of look like and show you how God can help you pull out that sandy block and stick something else that's a little bit more granite, so to speak. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. Oh, hey, Nilda. Hi, so much. We're so glad to see you. Welcome from Toronto, Canada. We're so glad to have you here. I want to jump right in to section 60. I've got a handful of verses. We're not going to read every single one of them, but I've got 2 or 3. Could I ask you to read a few things for us here, Jen? I'm going to pull it up on the screen. This is section 60. We're going to start with verse 5, and then we're going to skip over to 61:22. And then I'll do 61:35 and 62:5. Does that sound good? You take 2 and I'll take 2?
You bet.
All right.
So I'll begin with Doctrine and Covenants, section 60, verse 5. But verily I will speak unto you concerning your journey unto the land from whence you came. Let there be a craft made or bought, as seemeth you good. It mattereth not unto me. And take your journey speedily for the place which is called St. Louis.
Okay, quick pause right here. The person that is talking is God. The people that he's speaking to are missionaries that were leaving Kirtland, Ohio, and heading towards Missouri. They're trying to scout out what would eventually become the city of Zion. And some of them were wondering, like, how are we supposed to get there? Does God want us to walk? Does he want us to take a boat? Does he want us to take a canoe? Should we go on horseback? Give us instructions and we'll figure it out. Okay, so that's the audience here. Okay, continue.
Yep. And then in DNC 61:22, and it mattereth not unto me after a little, if it so be that they fill their mission, whether they go by water or by land. Let this be as it is made known unto them according to their judgments hereafter.
All right, 61 verse 35. And let them journey together, or 2 by 2, as seemeth them good. Only let my servant Reynolds Cahoon and my servant Samuel Smith, with whom I'm well pleased, be not separated until they return to their homes, for this is a wise purpose in me. And finally, section 62 verse 5. Then you may return to bear record, yea, even altogether, or 2 by 2, as seemeth you good. It mattereth not unto me. Only be faithful, and declare glad tidings unto the inhabitants of the earth, or among the congregations of the wicked. Okay, so easy question, Jen. And for everybody else that's chiming in, what common messages do you see in these handful of verses that we've picked out here?
Just go.
Just go.
Just go and do it.
Yeah. Now, so to use modern language, do you get the idea that God doesn't care? Is that what he's saying? Like, does he not care about what method they use? Or what lesson do you think he's wanting them to learn here when he says, just go?
To me, it's a matter of kind of something that I've found in several circumstances over the years, which is that of, yes, include prayer and everything, and be intentional and strive to be in tune with the Spirit. At the same time, we were given a brain for a reason, and agency is a real thing, but also we can be smart and make choices and puppets and and we, and that the circumstances will vary. And so, it's one thing to tell your children, like, always, I don't know, even I really like that first one that you had me read, which, talked about just get a craft. You can build it or buy it. I don't like either way, whatever works best for you, which I really like, because especially if he's talking to a lot of people, it might be like, whoa, I don't have time to build a vehicle or a boat or whatever the case is, or someone else may have time and resources, but not money, or materials rather than resources, but not money, so.
I've got thoughts too, really quick.
Yes.
I believe it was our last lesson when he talked about a slothful and not a wise servant, right? He was commanded in all things. The Lord doesn't need to tell us everything. Not only that, he doesn't want to. Who has time to do that? I believe that's true for him too. And there is not one right way to do anything. It's like Yeah, figure it out. Like Jenny said, use your brain. You've been given a brain for a reason. Use it. Now, that doesn't mean that in all things, we have to be commanded in some things. We have to follow, what he wants us to do. But I believe that's the exception, or excuse me, the rule is we traditionally have to do it on our own. The exception is sometimes there is one single right answer, and that's when we search for his will in that thing. A lot of times he's saying, get it done. I don't care how you do it. There's multiple different ways to get to that destination. I think you used that imagery last time, or maybe it was 2 times ago. It's like there's multiple ways to get there.
So this, you guys bring up a really good point. Is it a contradiction to want to be guided by inspiration versus figuring out on our own? Are those opposing things? Like it's either us or it's God, or could it be a yes and thing?
Yeah, it can absolutely be a yes and, because that's why I say it's important to also be in tune with, is this right? Am I doing the right thing? Because if maybe your method that you found in your life is, okay, I'm just going to keep going until I'm told not to. That's also a thing.
Absolutely. There's a perspective that I remember thinking about so many times when it was kind of harped on with how confirmation was supposed to work when we are facing problems or struggles. John, if you pull up the next picture there for us, so many times we think that when we are faced with a problem or a question, we hope that first, when we have this problem or question, we hope that we're going to get some kind of like inspiration, right? Like as soon as we have the problem or the question, we're going to get this inspiration, and that's going to take us to whatever is the best solution. And that best solution is going to be blessed by a type of confirmation afterward that says, yep, that's the best one. And so many times when we talk about we are thankful for having modern revelation, we're thankful for the gift of the Holy Ghost, it kind of can feel like we default to this model where here's the problem, God's going to tell me how to fix it, then I'll get to the answer, right? That's kind of what we hope for. Now, I don't know about you, but the practical reality might be a little bit different sometimes. Sometimes what we get instead of that inspiration, go ahead and go to the next one, John, is we'll be facing with that problem or question, and instead we get this struggle. And through that struggle, we could possibly find not just the best solution, but lots of different solutions. And many of them could have confirmations, and maybe some of them don't. Now, does that mean that that's not the best one? Maybe, we don't know. It's possible. I was talking about this with my Sunday school class. So in my ward, I'm currently a youth Sunday school teacher, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things to do in the class. And we were sharing experiences about how this has kind of been a struggle for some kids. And, for teens, we said, we will talk so much about getting God's direction for where you want to go to school, what kind of major, should I go on a mission, what kind of person do you want to date, what kind of person you want to marry. And sometimes we slide into this default model of, you're going to have a question, God's going to direct you, you're going to find the answer. You don't have to do anything. Like God's going to tell you every step of the way. He's going to lead you, because that's what happens in scriptures. And instead, I presented this model and said, you guys, you have to be prepared for that struggle. That is what is likely going to happen. You're probably going to have multiple different very good answers, none of which have the one particular blessing. I was talking with a young teenager at an EFY session once that I was presenting at, and he was a counselor. He was like one of the adult, he's like a returned missionary, and he was dating several different girls, and he was trying to figure out which one he wanted to really pursue a relationship with. And he's like, Brother Bernard's, I prayed about it, and I got a yes confirmation on this one girl. And then I met this other person, and I prayed about her, and I got a yes confirmation on that girl. And what the heck does that even mean? And I was like, well, dude, it can mean two things. Number one, God's reinstating polygamy, and you're the first person to learn about it, so have fun with that. Or two, God is saying, you figure it out. They could both be perfectly awesome. Oh, and by the way, you kind of need to ask them too, because they get their agency in this case as well. So good luck with that, pal. And he sat back and he was kind of frustrated. He's like, that doesn't answer my question. I'm like, I know, it's exactly right, because you have to go through the struggle. You have to figure this out on your own. Is it possible that you'd be perfectly happy with both of them or with either of them? Yeah. Does that mean that you're going to have a perfectly smooth sailing and a perfectly flawless path with either of them? Nope. Because getting a confirmation of the right way to do things is not a guarantee that things will be perfect. And it's not going to supersede their agency or any other number of things that could possibly go wrong. So go use your best judgment, do the best that you can. And then if and when something goes wrong, rely on God and it's going to turn out okay.
I really like that. And I really like that you put what we get is the struggle, because I feel like you could also add another struggle after all those solutions, in fact, because I think, just to use any of those examples that you gave, that boy saying, oh, I want to marry this person. And so then what? Let's say he follows that path. He marries one of the people and something goes wrong. And then, oh my gosh, I made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
Did you? Or is this just part of what life is?
Is that
you choose one university and you go there. This is hard. Yeah. Because it's all hard. Well, I should have gone to the other hard one, and so I think it really is, it's a learning process throughout our lives.
It's really great. I've got this quote that popped up from Elder Oaks. John, would you mind pulling that up? Okay, so this is Dallin H. Oaks. This was from a fireside that he gave at BYU back in 1992. And we're going to share an excerpt from this. It's kind of long. Jen, would you mind reading that for me, please?
Happy to. Oh, on June 7th, 1992?
Bingo.
Oh, my goodness. President Oaks said, a desire to be led by the Lord is a strength, but it needs to be accompanied by an understanding that our Heavenly Father leaves many decisions for our personal choices. Personal decision-making is one of the sources of growth we are meant to experience in mortality. Persons who try to shift all decision-making to the Lord and plead for revelation in every choice will soon find circumstances in which they pray for guidance and don't receive it. For example, this is likely to occur in those numerous circumstances in which the choices are trivial or either choice is acceptable. We should study things out in our minds using the reasoning powers our Creator has placed within us. Then we should pray for guidance and act upon it if we receive it. If we do not receive guidance, we should act upon our best judgment. And I really like that because sometimes we say, when we talk about not receiving revelation or guidance, we can immediately categorize that into a stupor of thought. But here President Oaks is telling us to use your best judgment.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Sometimes we think that if God is not saying yes, then that must mean he's saying no. And sometimes that's not the case. If God's not saying yes, if he's not saying anything, then he's not saying anything. And that's all it means. And therefore we have to say, okay, therefore what? And therefore, like you say, we continue and life continues and we keep on going. I think in the great celestial calculus of what we are supposed to do, we can be so concerned and so focused on trying to get things right, trying to be 100% accurate and trying to be totally perfect, that we become afraid of using our own agency. And what I'm hearing from President Oaks, John, if you pull up the next one, please, is that if we can reframe our perspective and understand that in the grand scheme of things, using our agency is of more importance and is greater than being accurate with it. God just doesn't want us to make the right choice. He just wants us to make a choice and then to learn how to live with the consequences. And if we get it wrong, then we'll learn, and that's okay. And if we get it right, then awesome, we got it right. But the point is, we weren't here to follow a predetermined path all the way down and never stray from it. We were here to learn how to choose. And that includes learning how to choose in the absence of any revelation or any inspiration.
Yeah.
So there's another verse in the same section that I think kind of sums this up. John, would you pull up the next one, please? This is D&C 62, 8 and 9. Jen, would you mind reading that for me?
These things remain with you to do according to judgment and the directions of the Spirit. Behold, the kingdom is yours. And behold, and lo, I am with the faithful always, even so. Amen.
Okay, a couple things that I thought really stood out to me this time. I love the ordering of verse 8. When he's talking about all these things, notice the ordering. He doesn't say, follow the Spirit first and then use your best judgment. Now, granted, we don't know if order is really important. But if we were to assume that it is, notice that in this case, he says, these things remain with you to do according to judgment. And the implied subject of that is your judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And your judgment will only come from experience. And that means sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And the directions of the Spirit. The second thing that stood out to me is in verse 9, because so many times the historical tradition of the Lord's Prayer has been that the kingdom belongs to God, right? Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. And we speak as if we are building God's kingdom. But notice here in verse 9 that he is making us co-owners, or at the very least co-operators of his kingdom. And by doing so, he places a significant amount of not only autonomy, but responsibility and trust in us as cooperators of that kingdom. Look at what he says. Behold, the kingdom, the one that we're all part of, it's yours. This is your kingdom that you're building. You guys are in charge of this. Y'all need to figure this out. And it's okay. Lo, I'm with the faithful always. So I'm always going to be here in one form or another. And that means that y'all are going to have to struggle with this. And it's not going to be perfectly clear. And you may not get it right the first time, but it's going to be okay. You know, I want to share another story from mission. We're going to have a couple of missionary stories here today. There was a tradition that popped up a couple of times in our mission where we would be trying to find directions on maps. As in a map, we'd pull out where we're going to go for the day. And we would pray about, should I go to the north end of the island or the south end of the island or over to that village or over to this village or into that tribe or whatever, because we really wanted to be guided by the Spirit. We really wanted to follow inspiration. And this was a righteous, honest, humble desire. And some missionaries learned about a type of divination, as the Old English would call it. The official term is geomancy. So if divination is the attempt to divine God's will through a series of seemingly random acts of chance, casting lots, rolling dice, pulling stones out of a box, drawing straws, these sorts of things, using the Urim and Thummim. These are all types of divination that have existed for centuries, not only in Christianity, but in plenty of other faith and religious organizations. In the Old Testament, this was a significant part of how the high priest in the tabernacle operated. They would cast lots all the time to divine God's will, because if random acts of chance could happen, then it's possible that God would be nudging the dice a certain way. He's using like a Jedi mind trick to get the cube to land on a certain face. So this is where casting lots, like in the Book of Mormon, when Nephi and his brothers are trying to figure out who's going to go fight Laban, they would cast lots because that divines God's will. So some of our missionaries thought that they could do the exact same thing when trying to figure out where they're going to go casting, or tracting. So we would do this. I don't want to call it a trick because that kind of diminishes it a little bit. But the idea was each other would go into a separate room with a map. And they would say a humble prayer, and then they would start writing down the names of streets, the first thing that popped into their mind, like 8 to 10 different streets or whatever, or families that they should go visit. And they would do it completely independently. And then the two elders or sisters would come back together and compare lists. And there was probably going to be some that were unique or one-offs. But any places where that list overlapped, where they had the same name pop up into both of their heads, they took that as a divination sign that that's what God wanted them to go do. And so they said, hey, if we have these two overlapping circles, then that must not be a coincidence. That must be inspiration. So let's go there. And then they would go out in perfect faith that God has said, hey, he told both of us to go to this one particular place. We're going to find somebody on that street, and it's going to be awesome. And a handful of times it worked. And by worked, I mean that they were able to teach discussions. but a surprising number of times it didn't. And that kind of led us to feel frustrated, like, well, did we do it wrong? Was the whole thing not supposed to work? And coming back to this idea of using our own agency, having had the wisdom of years to reflect on it, I realized that we were attempting to otherwise offload this decision-making process to a higher power. And sometimes that can be a comforting thing for us, because we realize that should the endeavor fail, should nothing happen, well, that means it's not our fault.
Mm-hmm.
Because we did what God told us to do, and it failed, ergo, God wanted it to fail. And so that means we're just kind of along for the ride. We kind of get to escape the consequences. He takes all the blame. We don't have any responsibility. We did our part that we were supposed to, and we went out there and nothing happened. But this also means that we don't really have to struggle to separate the good possible solutions from poor solutions. And if we don't have all the information possible, if we're facing our own inadequacies, our own ignorances, if we're sitting there looking at a map, just we don't know what to do, sometimes we can feel dumb, we can feel scared, we can feel incapable. And sometimes that attacks our sense of worth. Like if I was a smarter or a better or more faithful person, I would have gotten the answer or whatever. And so we say, well, let me have God fix this for me. He can tell me what to do. So in our evolutionary wisdom, our brain will look for shortcuts through the decision-making process. And he says, if somebody else can do the work for me because I'm not good enough, then somebody else can find the answer. And that also means that if the endeavor succeeds, if it turns out great, then we get all the benefit, right? We can escape and offload the problem. And if things turn out great, yay us. I reap the rewards. I did what God said. And look how lucky and blessed we were. I'll give him the credit, a hat tip to him or whatever. But then we can go on. But the problem is that by offloading that decision process, we miss out on so much. Because how can we learn from our mistakes if we are too afraid to even make them? How can we develop the strength to rise and rise again unless we have fallen and fallen again? So before we go any further, Jen, any thoughts or comments on this so far?
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I really like what you're saying because, again, just like the previous slide with the struggle. The struggle is part of it. It's something that we don't talk about so often, and so often we equate struggle with mistakes, with weakness, when in fact it's the struggle not only that helps us learn, but is what turns us toward the Savior. I know in my life, the times when I have, leaned on my Savior the very most are those times when I feel most frightened, most alone, most in need. And also when I have made an error or I just don't know where to go. And none of us wants to find ourselves in that situation. But how else would we turn toward him? Go ahead.
That's a really great point. And that kind of brings to a reflective question that this is, I guess, for the class and for anybody listening, but also for you. How does allowing yourself to choose and possibly make a mistake in the process help you understand Christ's atonement better? What do you think?
So, and sorry, I didn't mean to kind of spoil that idea. It really is kind of naturally what came to mind as you were talking. And before we began recording, we were talking a little bit about how earlier today I was having a conversation with some friends, and we were talking about things like grief and sorrow and suffering and the purpose of all of it. And this idea came up of what you're asking about allowing yourself to choose and possibly making a mistake in the process. How does it help us understand Christ's atonement better? And what my friend shared is something that she recently heard from, I think, a leading saints mental health broadcast that's going on right now. But basically that rather than being perfectionists, we ought to serve or to seek to be redemptionists.
Ooh.
Right? Instead of
redemptionists. Could you clarify that for us? That's a great word.
So rather than be a perfectionist, wherein we don't make a mistake, because again, it's scary and we don't want to be failures or feel like failures, but rather a redemptionist, which is whether it's for our own selves or perhaps in a situation where, I don't know, we have kids who make choices that aren't great. That we don't, that there are situations where what we are requiring as far as our expectations of ourselves or of our children, this is, rather than beat ourselves or anyone else up. No one needs help feeling shame. No one needs help feeling bad about themselves, but to tell ourselves, okay, this is a great opportunity for me to learn a lesson, and who better to help me learn a lesson than my Savior? And same for the kids. Yeah, this stinks. Shoot. What's the consequence? Well, there are consequences. What are we going to take from it? This is a great time to learn about your Savior's love.
That is so great. There's a quote that I started using with my kids. Originally, the context was in board games, as they were struggling to learn how to play board games of all different types. It's one of the little hobbies that our family does. John, would you mind pulling up the next one? And I found it to be so applicable, not only to just that, but in life. So, because one of my sons was really frustrated that he kept losing a particular game. And he's like, man, I hate losing. I wanted to win. And I was like, dude, it's not win or lose. It's win or learn. There is no failure. You either win or you learn. So if you won, awesome. If you didn't win, then you have learned hopefully something to hopefully win again the next time. So no matter what you do, you're going to come out on top either way. But for him, it took quite a bit of reframing to look at the problem differently, because he was thinking that the only thing that was good was winning, right? And if you didn't win, then you did something wrong because you weren't good enough. And in this spiritual context, this whole idea of winning is like you said, spiritual perfectionism, where we're good enough. We're good enough to get into the temple. We're good enough to celestial, glory or whatever. We're good enough to have the blessings. And I guess the harsh reality, and perhaps this is the subconscious fear that drives so much of this anxiety, is that we know that we are never, ever, always going to be good enough.
Right.
And because of that, we feel scared to try.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, God is saying, you need to look at this differently. You need to look at this and realize that as long as you learn, it's okay. It's like he's saying, yeah, I'm giving y'all permission to screw it up because we've already accounted for it, right?
Yeah.
Well, and this is the parable of the talents all over, right? That we bring that up quite a bit here, but he expects us to do something with what we've got, right? And if we bury that talent, if we don't try, that's worse than losing some of those in that parable, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've got another quote that goes in with this from our wonderful Relief Society president, Sister Jean Bingham. Would you mind reading that for us, Jen?
So often we feel like we need to have someone give us direction. We don't. Use your own initiative, your own inspiration, your own personal revelation to find ways to bless.
Whew, good stuff. So quick context for this. This was from an article in the LDS Church News. She was talking to a reporter, but by extension, addressing all the women of the Relief Society. And it was about an annual celebration of what the Relief Society does. And they were talking about all the different programs that the Relief Society does. And the question was kind of offered like, what about countries that don't have the same stuff that Utah has? Like, what if we don't have as many saints there or whatever? And I love this where she's saying, look, this is not on the Relief Society to give you something that is going to be acceptable enough in God's eyes. Mm-hmm. That in the absence of any official program, go find out any way to serve, no matter what. And everything that you offer will be accepted. I mean, that's the parable of the widow's mite, right? That it doesn't matter how much you do or how big it is, that however humble your tiny little mite of an offering is, that is considered absolute riches to the God to whom it is given, because he knows that we're serving each other. And so all of it is shareable. Now, take a look at the three things that she pointed out. Do we think, is there any significance in the order in which she lists the three things that we're supposed to use? Do you see them there? What does she say?
So she says, use your own initiative, your own inspiration, your own personal revelation to find ways to bless.
To find ways to bless. Does it matter, do you think, that the order in which, is there any lesson to be learned there or any insights on that? I
think it's great because, and this is not where what you're not going to hear from me is, well, women are naturally this way. I mean, that was but I honestly, like as humans, use your own initiative and your own inspiration. Like if we for a second just look at those two, it's like, do you see someone in need of help? So do I need to tell you what to do? You know what I mean? Do you need an assignment to do it? That there's no revelation in that. That is humanity. That is life experience. That is charity. That is goodness. That is help. It's what we're here to do on this planet. And sometimes there are people, or sometimes we find ourselves in situations where, gosh, I mean, we are the people there to help, to find ways to bless. If I can just an example just came to me. Do you mind if I share? Let me tell you a story. Gather around, children. Just a little over 5 years ago, I went on a date with a man. I know, right? Get comfy. He's now my husband, spoiler. But we went on a hike together. I was living in Provo. He was living in Salt Lake City. He took the train down. I picked him up, and we drove to the east bench of Provo and embarked on what we like to call Hike the Y. Now, the Y Trail, which is, for those who may not be familiar, or even if you are, if you're familiar or not, this is still the case. There's a big white Y on the mountain right above Brigham Young University, and it is made of limestone, and there is a trail that can help you reach it. Yes, many switchbacks. I believe in distance, is it only a mile or just for a mile
range?
Yeah. The slope though is intense. It is not an easy hike. It is difficult. And so we went on the hike. It was very nice. And we opted to sit at the top when we got there. Our intention was to then continue on above the Y and go to the mountain above. While we were sitting there are some other groups and families and whatnot that were sitting there. And there was a little girl who was about 8 years old. She was 8, who at the top of the Y, her family was about halfway down. She began, I don't even want to say it, to run down this, to run down the face of the Y. Now,
down the face of the Y, which is like hecka steep.
Very steep and slick.
Because it's coated in concrete.
Limestone and painted. And it was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. And we were sitting there. Yes, what you're doing right now is exactly what we did. And we were like, no. And because at first she was running, and then there is no way to stop. And she tumbled, not kind of like slid. She tumbled, like her entire body, bouncing on the concrete as she went down.
Going down. Oh my God.
Screaming. And it was horrendous. I'm comforting myself right now because I have goosebumps thinking about it. It was awful. And we're like, what do we do? And I looked at John and I was like, do we go back up? And he's like, we have to go see if she needs help. And so we went down, we didn't take the trail. We just kind of scooted down, on our seats down to where her family was. And they we learned they were visiting from Arizona, so they were not local, and so they weren't familiar with really the terrain, and so I used my first aid skills to just kind of evaluate if it was safe to pick her up, like kind of, where does it hurt? Can you touch it? Can you show me? Anyway, long story short, too late. My John died. Oh, I didn't think I could. Carried this girl. Her family wasn't in the physical shape that would allow them to descend that difficult trail while carrying her. And the rest of our plans for the day were shot. But I will never forget him like carrying this girl. And she was tiny. I mean, she was 9. She was thin. She probably weighed nothing. Don't tell John I said that, because he carried her down a mountain, but I just, and here's a man I had only been dating for a short while. And I just, and I'm trying to help him and talk with the family and try to comfort them. And the only thing I could do to help him as he was carrying her down was occasionally reach over and push his glasses up the bridge of his nose because they were sliding down. And then we got toward the bottom, and I ran ahead to my car because I had like gloves and first aid stuff, because I'm a nerd. I mean, a mom. And we basically gave them directions to the hospital. We don't know who they are. We don't know whatever happened to them. But that was an instance where we very much could have walked away. We could have said, well, we're not medical professionals. There are so many people here that could help. Like there's probably a nurse here. There's probably a doctor here. You hear those stories all the time.
Take care of it.
Yeah.
I'm walking on my road down to Jericho. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have a mountain to climb. We have a hike to go on. And it wasn't necessarily personal revelation, but rather initiative and inspiration that we're there, so we're going to see if we can help. Now, there are other times when we may find ourselves in situations where our help is not the help needed, but again, it wasn't his calling. He wasn't, divinely appointed or assigned to do this. It was just somebody helping where they could. So
that is absolutely wonderful. And that is such a great way to wrap up. Man, it's like, how do you top that?
Well, don't run down the why is what I'm saying, guys.
There you go. Kids, listen to your parents.
Yep.
Don't run down the why.
I'll be your mom. Don't run down the why. And if you ever find yourself up there at the why, just take a minute and imagine what that is like, because it was horrifying.
Oh.
But it was something that really it just taught me a lot about that very principle of doing good where we can because we can.
Yeah. That is so great. There are so many times when in our lives we are afraid of getting things wrong, right? And to kind of share some closing thoughts here about this. We frequently teach our kids in songs ever since we're little that if we just choose the right way, we'll be happy. I must always choose the right. And sometimes we can become so afraid of making any wrong step that sometimes it might feel easier just to let Jesus take the wheel and tell us what we're supposed to do. So that way we will always be happy because we never chose the wrong. So we always chose the right, we're going to be happy. But that also means that we never have to endure the struggle of possibly getting it wrong. And so as a result of saying, hey, you do this, to find the shortcut, we create these little checklists or patterns or stereotypes or models of Mormonism that don't really fit everybody, but somehow hope that would be a recipe for success. And yet those shortcuts, while certainly born of an honest intent, will ultimately lead to failure, because we will ultimately fail, and not because we're bad, but just because we're mortal. We're human. One of the aspects of Mormonism that I love the most is this perspective of we have a purpose in life, but there's this delicate balance where we strive to find trying to be agents unto ourselves and doing everything right, and relying on the grace of God when things go wrong. Somebody once said that Heaven is not going to be a museum full of flawless specimens, perfect GPAs, the holy women and holy men who always made the right decisions in life, where the celestial people are held on like glass pedestals behind velvet ropes. Heaven's not going to look like that. It's probably going to look like a rehab clinic. It's going to look like an auto body repair shop. It's going to be full of the bandaged and the bruised, the scarred and the sinful. It's going to be full of women and men who spent a lifetime making mistake after mistake, sometimes gaining a bit of wisdom along the way, sometimes getting the scraped knees and the bruised heads and the absolutely broken hearts, because everybody had to fall on their own. And eventually they had to rely on the merits and mercies of him who was mighty to save, or happened to be there at the right time and was strong enough to carry you down off the mountain. Because once upon a time, you know, as the fable goes, our Eve and Adam parents graduated from that Garden of Eden into a whole brave new world, and they had no instructions on what to do next. They had nothing but each other. They had grit and determination. They had the haunting memory of what they used to have, and they had the blessed hope of what they could have again. They knew the starting point and they knew the destination. But in between one end and the other was this whole lifetime of choices, and there was no one right way to do it, no singular perfect set of decisions that would be optimal. And just like the early saints in Joseph's day trying to get over to Missouri, and just like us, there are going to be wrong roads and U-turns and life lessons and painful experiences that just have to be experienced. And so when we finally make it to the end, it won't be in robes that were kept clean due to having never been used, or shoes that never stepped off the path, but we're going to arrive body and soul tattered and worn. We're going to be stained and spotted, and somehow through it all, it will have been made white again through the blood of the Lamb. And that cleansing power is not just a backup plan, but it was the main plan all along. And that's what we have to rely on.
Beautiful. I love it. Absolutely right. That it is all part of the plan. It's okay. It's okay to find ourselves where we are because the Savior's there. That's all part of that plan. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you, John, for everything that you've done here off on the side. And thanks, Ben, again for your preparation. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. A completely different time, a completely different day for our lesson. We will be back on a regularly scheduled, day on Sunday, June 13th. It will be just one section for that lesson, Doctrine and Covenants, section 63. It will be Sunday, June 13th, 9 a.m. ish to 9:20 ish. Mountain Daylight Time is when we begin, and that's 8 Pacific. So thank you again, Ben. Thank you to everyone who participated, and we will plan to see you again next week. Have a great week. Take care.